Welcome to the Board of Education meeting of Tuesday, August 16th, 2011. I will recall this meeting to order. We have been in closed session since 6 o'clock for the purposes of collective negotiations and approval of minutes of closed session minutes of 6:14, 6:27, and 8:24. I will note that all board members are present. Would you please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. First item on our agenda this evening is a student recognition. Mr. Purnell.
Yes, it's my pleasure this evening to welcome the York School Boys Volleyball team, and they are here because they have been awarded the Coaches Association Team Academic Award. So talking about representing Elmhurst in an outstanding way, both in their sportsmanship but also in their ability to academics. And so I don't know if is the coach here? If you could come to this and just say a few words about your team and what's going on, that would be great.
You guys have to do this.
Hey, congratulations. Nice job. Congratulations. Nice job. Nice going.
Who started this?
Way to go. Thank you. Made us proud. Thank you. Nice job.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Way to go.
I think this is the first time I've ever seen that, but.
Way to go. Thanks.
Back around to the front. Cover us up.
Like in a row, facing that way. It is a great group of kids. I've watched lots of board meetings. I've never seen a group get acknowledged and then go across like that, so that was not planned. Every year, the American Volleyball Coaches Association honors teams across the nation for maintaining a cumulative GPA of 3.3 on a 4-point scale or higher. This year, our team had a cumulative GPA of 3.38, which I thought was outstanding. I didn't know if we would be above 3.3 or not when I did the calculations. And they require that we do the GPA for the entire year, so it covered the entire year last year, just not the spring season that we play in. So I was very pleased. Not every state has boys volleyball, so there's less teams than girls, but there's about 2,200 teams in the nation, high schools in the nation that offer boys volleyball. And York is one of 16 that received this award. So it's very prestigious. I'll also mention that 3 of the teams out of the 16 in the nation were from the West Suburban Silver. So York joined Hinsdale Central and Glenbard West. So congratulations to the boys. We're very proud of them.
Don't go away. Mr. Collins, Board Secretary, has a proclamation to read for you.
Well, I also have just a couple of remarks, but Mr. Dowdy took away a little bit, but you made some excellent points. So tonight I have the honor to recognize our boys volleyball team for receiving this year's American Volleyball Coaches Team Academic Award. I won't point out the grade point average requirement, but this year, according to the American Volleyball Coaches website, they broke a record this year by awarding this to 481 teams because they award it not only to high schools but to colleges and universities as well. I'm honored to present this athletic recognition because the point of high school athletics is not only to build athletic prowess, but more importantly, it's to shape scholars and build our students' character. I think the AVCA Executive Director, Kathy DeBoer, sums it up pretty well. She says, A hearty congratulations to all the volleyball coaches and teams who won the 2011 AVCA Team Academic Award. Teams do not succeed in the classroom by accident any more so than they do on the court. The same coach who taught them volleyball skills cared enough about their academic achievement to gather their grades, calculate their GPA, and submit the nomination on their behalf. In doing so, these coaches sent a clear message that classroom success is just as important as court success. All involved should celebrate the award. So, I'm not finished. Sorry, just turning the page. And as Ken pointed out, that even though 481 high school and college teams won this award, actually the thing you might have missed is very few of the winners went to men's teams. The vast majority went to women's teams. So for collegiate men at the NCAA level, only 5 teams won the award, 2 of which were Stanford University and MIT. As Ken did point out, at the high school level, nationally, York was only one of 16 boys' teams to win this award. So now I get to read this proclamation and mispronounce pretty much all of your names. So whereas the Team Academic Award has been awarded to the York Community High School Boys Volleyball Team for the 2010-2011 season by the American Volleyball Coaches Association, the AVCA, and whereas the boys volleyball team was one of the 480 teams across the nation that displayed academic excellence in the classroom during the school year by maintaining at least a 3.3 cumulative team grade point average on a 4.0 scale, and whereas the team captured the Fremd Invitational on May 14th, the program's first title since 2003, and whereas the effort, dedication, and attitude developed through the sport of volleyball has a lifelong effect on the members of the team and on other student athletes. And whereas this accomplishment brings pride and prestige to York Community High School, to District 205, and to our community. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Education and the administration of Elmhurst Community Unit School District 205 express deep appreciation and congratulations to coaches Ken Dowdy and Mike Westendorf, and to co-captains Kevin Hobbs, Daniel Lesniewski. See, I'm starting. I'm on a roll now. You keep whispering in my ear, please. David Fella, Trevor Jordan, Miles Kalchik, Kyle Knighton, Michael Krepulek, Jack Meehan. Am I close? Mm-hmm. Duffy Pitlock, Jason Rebar, Jacob Ruprecht, Christopher Swash, Christopher Scudder, and you get to do the honors on this. And
Nikki T.
Nikki T. Thank you. Because it would have been unrecognizable, for their outstanding performance during the 2011 season. Yeah, gentlemen, in winning this award, you're an elite group of athlete scholars. You work hard on the court, and you work hard in the classroom. Congratulations to you and your coaches.
Thank you.
Now, don't leave yet. I have something for all of you. Congratulations.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks.
Ken, thanks a lot.
Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us tonight, and if you want to go out and have one last night of summer, I suggest you do. The next item on our agenda is public comments. One person has indicated a desire to address the board this evening. Please come to the podium, state your name and address for the record, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes. I would add that it is not the policy of the board to respond to public comments, but please know that we are listening. Tracy Rebeletti and Gianna Acquaviva.
Good evening, members of the board. My name is Tracy Rebeletti, and I'm a concerned parent of a biracial child that attends Churchville Middle School. This is Gianna Acquaviva, who is also a concerned parent from Churchville Middle School. And I'm here because, unfortunately, I have not received any type of, or myself or Mrs. Acquaviva have not received any type of resolution to this matter that we'd like to address in front of the board. My daughter, Deanna Shudrick, and Gianna's daughter, Sabrina Acquaviva, are both 7th graders, and they attended the summer school program in Churchville over the summer. And on a certain, the week of June 16th, Mrs. Newkirch, who was acting as the interim principal and was also a teacher at Churchville Junior High School, approached a table of students at the snack time / lunch time, in which the children had snacks and water bottles given to them. My daughter brought a packet of Crystal Light, which is a lemonade-flavored packet, and some of the other students at the same table asked her if she could have some. It should be noted that there were 2 African-American boys, my daughter, who's biracial, and Mrs. Acquaviva's daughter, in which Mrs. Newkirch approached the table and asked the 2 African-American boys to hand over their water bottles, to which he opened up the water bottles, sniffed them, gave them back. To my daughter, she took the water bottle from her, opened it, and drank from it. Gave it back to my daughter. Proceeded to ask Sabrina if she was sick, and Sabrina said no. Mrs. Newkirch then opened up the bottle, drank from it, and gave it back to them. Of course, I was very concerned when my daughter came back from school that day and had told both of us, Sabrina's mother as well as me, what had happened at school, and I had asked what was the reason why they were approached and they were singled out, and were there other students that had the same type of flavored water packets in their water bottle, to which she said yes. On June 23rd, I approached Mrs. Newkirch. I attended, while I dropped off Mrs. Acquaviva's 2 children that attended, and I approached Mrs. Newkirch and I asked her if this report that I had gotten from my daughter was accurate. To which, my dismay, she actually said yes. I feel as if my daughter, as well as the other students involved, were some type of racial profiling or being discriminated against, in which other children had the same type of water bottles, but yet they didn't have to endure someone taking something off of their person, nor having something drank from them and then given back to them. And I've left several emails, which I do have a handout, if you'd like, any of you like to review the concerns I've addressed to Ms. Michelle Brown as well as Mrs. Newkirch. And I've gotten no response via email nor by telephone. So I'm hoping something with the board can address this situation, because I'm quite concerned that this is some type of ongoing racial discrimination.
Thank you, Mrs. Rebeletti. If you would please leave your documents with the board secretary, we'll see that all board members get them. Mr. Purnell, I will turn this over to you to do some investigation. Thank you.
Can she have 3 minutes?
I just would like to add to that statement that when Ms. Rebeletti went to the school and discussed this with Ms. Newkirch, she said that the reason she took the waters and drank from it is because she suspected that the students had put some type of alcohol into the water bottles, and that's why she drank from them. To me, that's a very serious matter, and if you did suspect that, I don't understand why after this occurred, Ms. Newkirch did not notify us of the situation that happened, and I think she should have at least notified us, not that we had to hear it from our children. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you also for your comments. That concludes the public comments portion of our meeting. The next item on the agenda is Superintendent's communication. Mr. Purnell.
Yes, we're going to start this evening with this York Student Enrichment Team, who has students here to do a presentation for the board this evening on the YSET process and coming together to support students at York High School. So I will turn this over to the YSET students.
First, we're going to hear from Mrs. Ruprecht and team.
Welcome.
Is this thing on? Sorry, inside joke. Good evening, and to the Board of Education, we wanted to thank you for taking a few minutes to learn about the York Student Enrichment Team, and I know that some of you on the board are more familiar. I'm Diana Smith, the principal at York. Just to give a little bit of background, last year the board was faced with incredibly difficult decisions about trying to balance the budget. And students and parents on the York Advisory Team, in trying to consider some of the reductions and fee increases, initiated a dialogue around the impact of increasing fees on the students at York. And it really evolved, and we have some of the advisory team students here and also some parent members. It evolved into a larger question: how can we ensure that all students at York have access to academic and extracurricular opportunities regardless of their economic means? And the answer really emerged through the formation of the York Student Enrichment Team. And you see the steering committee here tonight. You'll hear from the students. Ironically, Ken Dowdy, the coach that you talked with tonight, is one of the staff members, the many staff members who have been involved. He's giving a presentation to the York faculty tomorrow asking for payroll donations for YSET as well. And it has been, from my perspective, really inspiring to see what's possible when parents and students and staff come together around an issue like this. So thank you for giving us a few minutes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Deb Webb, and I am a York mom and a member of the York Advisory Team. And when we had these conversations, first of all, they weren't initially even in the York Advisory Team. It was when we heard that all these fees were being raised, we looked at each other, friends, looked at each other and said, oh my gosh, well, we're going to be able to figure out a way to do this, pay these hopefully. But what about our other friends who've lost their jobs, who've maybe had foreclosures on their homes, had a short sell? What about our York parent friends that are working 2 or 3 jobs in order to enable their children to have that wonderful Elmhurst education? How in the world is everybody going to be able to pay all these additional fees? And as everyone started talking, the students, the parents, the administrators, the YSET was born, York Student Enrichment Team. Working together has been a wonderful experience, and we've really gotten a lot out of this. But we do see this as a short-term fix. And we are praying that by partnering together with all of you, we will be able to come up with a more viable solution. So, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Margaret Harrell. And the key word here is partnership, and that's what we have really bred. My goal is to come out and tell you a little bit of how our group came together and how we enhanced and expanded. The four of us came together and we said, this is really a daunting task. How will we ever make this run, make this work? We sat back and we decided to divide this initiative into three groups, three functioning groups. The first group was the individual and group solicitation, and you'll hear more from that from Nancy Rupert. The second group was the marketing and fundraising, and Deb Conroy is going to tell you a little bit about that. And the third group that we've talked about, which has really become four groups, is the process team as well as the accountability. With the process team, some of the key pieces that we're tasked with was trying to understand, one, we had a partnership with the foundation. How would we transfer that money that we had collected into the foundation and make sure that money would be distributed properly? And we created a high-level process for that. The second piece that we were tasked with was trying to identify the students and create a process, a confidential process that would get the money that was needed to these students who have gone through the application process. It was quite a process, and we reached a very important milestone. The milestone, you have those documents in front of you. We have a grant application as well as a frequently asked questions regarding the process. Key pieces on here, and we talk about collaboration, is that there were so many people that were involved. We had people from York, deans, counselors, faculty member, administration. We had people from the foundation, the board. We had representation from the district, from the school board. And we had quite a few concerned family members that we all came together and tried to make this work. So I am going to switch and have Mrs. Conroy tell you a little bit about the fundraising piece.
I'm Deb Conroy, and I think what Margaret was trying to get across to you is that we have an unbelievable community here in Elmhurst, and they've all come together because we all have the same philosophy, that every child deserves the same education regardless of income. I'm fortunate to chair the fundraising event and marketing committee, and Deb Webb is a co-chair with me. Our committee consists of many students, staff, and parents. We had our first event at Wilder Mansion, and that would not have been possible without a tremendous amount of help from staff. We had 4 weeks to pull that off, and after we paid expenses, we managed to raise over $10,000. But the truest part of that event, the most successful part of that event, was that our students were able to take ownership of the event. The amount of creativity and the opportunity they have at York High School, they were able to showcase that to everyone. We had well over 150 students there. Those students were able to greet folks and tell them how important this is to them and how important this is to their educational experience. This process is not sustainable as it is today, but this event, we feel, should be a yearly event to allow our students to showcase what they have, what York has to offer for a full involvement. In terms of marketing, we would like to thank Malia Smith and Elizabeth Dirkscheide, who have been working with us tirelessly to get our press releases out. We'd also like to thank the Elmhurst Patch, who continues to help YSET deliver their message to the community, which has been very important. This Thursday, August 18th, we will have an Eat and Earn fundraiser at Francesco Amici's on York Road, downtown Elmhurst. Simply tell your server you're there to support YSET, and 15% of the proceeds will go to the children. Look for a pancake breakfast and a car wash to be held at York in September, and the students are also working on an alumni basketball game. So if any of you board members played basketball at York, we invite you to participate. So I'll turn it over now to Mrs. Rupert, who will talk about the direct donations and her team.
Thank you. We're getting close to the student part of this. Just give me 30 more seconds. First of all, why YSET? Why is this just York? It's just because we didn't have the time to involve the other schools. The middle schools have a similar issue relative to music and transportation fees, and we desperately would like to get them involved. But we had a really short runway and a lot of money to raise, and I'm happy to report we've raised $50,000 to date. So we're on a roll. That's good. But most importantly, I've been honored to work with the students, and over 35 of them have presented to community organizations, parents, civic organizations, and anyone who will listen. So with no further ado, students, come on up.
All right, we're here to tell you a little bit more about what the York Student Enrichment Team is. The adults here helped us outline it, but we'll be going more into depth about what the need is, what it'll impact, and why we feel it's important to do this. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Joe Kleinhans. I'll be a junior at York next year. I am a three-sport athlete. I'm on the math team, and I'm also a York advisory team member.
I'm Jacob Ruprecht. I'm a senior at York. I'm a member of the football and volleyball teams. I'm a J. Calibrate scholar, and I'm an AP student.
I'm Maggie Patchett. I'm a senior. I'm in drama, music, and speech, as well as being on York advisory team and an AP student.
The York Student Enrichment Team was formed about 2 months ago in response to the increase of fees that was formed in the new budget. Our goal is really to make sure that every York student can remain as involved in their academic and extracurricular activities as possible. We've leveraged a partnership with the District 205 Foundation to help us accomplish this goal. In part, what they do is they've acted as a conduit for our funds, so all donations can go through the District 205 Foundation and come to us, which allows us to remain tax deductible.
As Joe said, it's really important to us that every York student has the chance to fully experience York and all the amazing academic, athletic, music, and extracurricular activities that there are offered at York. And one reason that we really like this idea is that studies have shown that when a student is involved in a sport, or a club or some kind of activity, that their academic performance actually increases and that their grades go up in the season that they're in the sport. I know, for example, myself, when I'm in my football and volleyball seasons, my grades do rise than in the winter when I'm off, because it's easier for me to come home from practice and focus on doing my homework than it is just coming home right from school, and a lot of times you get off topic on your homework. And also, studies have shown that many crimes and stuff like that happen between 3 and 6 after school, and extracurricular activities and sports and being involved in school can prevent students from committing a lot of these behaviors. Also, when a student's involved in York and they're on a team or they're really invested in their academics, they feel like they're more part of a community, and they also have people to look up to, whether it be captains or group leaders, and it just gives them another family inside of York that ties them more closely to the school. And this graph here shows the median income levels in District 205, and the 3 bars represent the median family income for just a family of 4, a single father household and a single mother household. And then the horizontal lines are the poverty level, which I'm sure everyone's heard of, and then the levels to qualify for both free and reduced lunch programs. And then the blue line is the living wage level, and that's a statistic produced by Penn State that analyzes kind of the community that is District 205 and tells how much a family of 4 would need to live in that community and just pay for their need expenses. And that's about $60,000. And I mean, most people think Elmhurst is a very affluent community, but it's very expensive to live in and to raise a family, as you can see by the living wage, and I'm sure as many of you know. And also, there's a really large difference between what's considered the living wage and the levels for reduced and free lunch and the poverty level. And this just shows that there can be a lot of families that, though they may not qualify for the reduced lunch program or the free lunch program, they're still not at the living wage, so they may not have enough money just to pay for their basic expenses. So they definitely wouldn't have enough money to pay for, new club fees, athletic fees, AP test fees. And also, one more thing I'd like to highlight is that there's the single father household on the median is already below the living wage, and the single mother household on the median falls at the level for reduced lunch. So the median family for these already need a lot of help. And then almost 13% of York students receive free or reduced price lunches, but we feel that this doesn't truly reflect the need at York because it is estimated that up to 60% of the students who may qualify for this program don't take advantage of it. I mean, for various reasons, they may not know about the program, there could be a language barrier, or they may not want to be singled out as using this program. And this is because kids feel the greatest discrimination based on their economic status. So a lot of times there may be a family that may not be in the best economic situation, but the kids will try to hide that, and that's why you don't see a lot of the need in school or just around the town. And also, this graph here shows the income distribution in Elmhurst, and the 3 bars represent families that have a yearly income of less than $50,000, between $50,000 and $125,000, and greater than $125,000. And that just shows that there's a significant part of the population, around 25%, that lives on less than $50,000 a year, which is below the living wage for Elmhurst. And also, this is worsened by the recent economic times. I'm sure all of you know that many people are losing their jobs or losing their homes. So this makes it even harder for students who may want to get involved or take AP classes to do so.
All right, and how this affects York itself. This year there have been a lot of fee increases, both for classes, extracurriculars, and books themselves. I've talked to people, I've looked at my own expenses, and for people who are taking a mainly academic schedule, as opposed to art or something like that, the book fees alone are around $500. And then you put on top of that extracurriculars, AP tests, and it becomes very expensive for families to afford all the classes and extracurriculars the kids would like to take. Very few students qualify for the free or reduced lunch who still have need, and there are no longer waivers for academic or athletic fees. So students who are in need of economic help and who have been participating in academics and athletics that they can't necessarily afford of their own will can no longer participate in these extracurriculars necessarily because the fees have been, or the waivers are no longer existing. Not to mention, students have a lot of extra costs. There are field trips, graphing calculators for freshmen, so many extra expenses, especially with music classes. It is $150 to participate in band or orchestra, and that doesn't include the fees to buy or rent an instrument, as well as a lot of students who take a lot of pride in their music, go above and beyond, and they take lessons outside of school. And that is even more of a burden on the family. And there's just a lot of expenses associated with both academic classes and extracurriculars that make it very hard for families to pay. Additionally, any students who participate in extracurriculars, or even students who just take pride in their work and stay after school to ask teachers for help or to spend extra time with the resources that our school has in the library or in study hall or in the math lab, have to pay an extra fee of $75 to take a later bus. And just to show you, all the fees in red are the fees that have gone up or been created in the past year. And there's a lot of music, art classes that have fees that didn't before, and a lot of athletic fees have gone up. And
I'm not involved in a lot of the music things, but I calculated all my fees from classes, books, sports, all that, and it came out to around $1,600 just for this year. And that includes my fees to play football and volleyball, my club fees, my fees for all my books and classes, my fees for the 5 AP tests I'm going to take, all of those. And I have an older brother who took a lot of the same classes that I did. So I'm using some of his old books, some of his old math and science books. So, I mean, my fees could be even higher. I could have up to $1,800 just to go to York High School and do what I want to do.
All right, and just to talk about how this impacts the students, these increased fees discourage a lot of students who are struggling economically to participate in electives or extracurriculars or AP tests that they want to take. This is hard for students who might be interested in a career in industrial technology or music or art because they need those classes for their future, but they can't necessarily take them. And that's really important for those students to have those classes, especially because with extracurriculars and a lot of the elective classes that now have fees, students won't join after freshman year a lot of times because they feel daunted by the fact that they would be in a lower level than many of their peers and would be with younger students. So this is especially important for the younger students to be able to have these fees not be a problem for them so that they can participate in academics and extracurriculars and have the full York experience and prevent the at-risk behaviors that we mentioned before.
All right, as Jacob outlined, there's a great need in Elmhurst, and as Maggie said, the impact can be huge. The benefit, I think, of the York Student Enrichment Team, there are numerous benefits. It opens all academic and extracurricular activities to all students, as well as supporting their academic performance. It also helps deter unhealthy behaviors and keep kids involved when they may be at the most risk. It does this by reducing or eliminating the financial constraints that may be blocking participation. This encourages and preserves high student participation levels. In the past, at York High School, we've seen about 90% student participation. What that means is 9 out of 10 students at York participate in one, and usually more than one out-of-school activity or after-school activity. At York, we're really proud of that number because it shows just how the York spirit and how involved York students are. And we do not want to see that number decrease in any way. When we were presented with the fee increases 2 months ago, the immediate solution was clear. We needed to find a way to raise funds and keep all York students as involved as possible. However, we have stated and will maintain that we are a one-year program. That being said, I would like to issue a challenge to the Elmhurst community, the district administration, and the school board to find creative means that will keep all York students and other district students involved in extracurricular activities. We also have other ways of we're looking for financial support. As we have said, we're trying to raise money to help provide waivers for these students. And you can make tax-deductible donations to District 205 Foundation. And as Mrs. Webb said, we've been holding fundraisers, and we'll continue to hold these fundraisers, and we're always looking for support at these fundraisers. If there are any questions, we're open now.
Board members, any questions? We really thank you for your passion and your dedication to this cause. We can see that you've put a lot of work into it. We commend your parents as well and other community members and teachers who are investing in this. I'm really glad that you came this evening to tell not only us about it, but the entire community who may be watching us on cable TV. So, any board members, comments or questions? Thank you again. We wish you every success.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda, appropriately, is the tentative fiscal 12 budget presentation. Mr. Pruneau.
Yeah, as timely as this is, unfortunately, one of the challenges we have and districts across the state have is balancing a budget and making the difficult decisions that Board of Education are put in. Unfortunately, the state has not supported to the level they have promised that has an effect on the bottom line for us. And boards, again, across the state are faced with some difficult decisions. So keeping that in mind, Chris Welton is going to present a proposed budget for this coming school year, the 2011-2012 school budget. This is the tentative budget. After tonight, it'll be posted for 30 days. There can be changes made to that budget, and then we will be coming back to the board for final approval in the September meeting. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Chris, and Chris has a presentation for you this evening.
Thank you. My first slide, as Dave said, the school code requires the tentative budget to be on display 30 days, and we're going to put the tentative budget on display tomorrow, and it will be on display until the September 27th board meeting, where we do final adoption. Any changes that we make between the tentative budget and the final budget, we will identify and illustrate at that board meeting. The first item on the revenues that I want to talk about is property taxes. You may have noticed in the tentative budget, the property taxes for FY 2012 are less than FY 2011, and that's really just a timing issue. We are on the cash basis of accounting, so we record deposits when they are received. And the taxes, there's the June 1st installment and then the September installment. And in FY11, you may remember last month, property taxes were more than budget, more than expected. Well, in the fall of 2010, we received about 52%, where we expect about 50-50, or 49.5, 49.5, right in there, where in the fall we got 52%, and then when in the spring we got 50. So 2011 property taxes turned out to be more than expected, and therefore then it makes the 2012 property taxes are actually less than 2011, where those are both expected to be 50%, 50%. So that's really just a timing issue. We will get what property taxes are extended. Which, as you know, the property tax cap limits us to CPI. The property taxes, we receive 84.5% of our revenues are property taxes. So this is a large amount of our funding, and we are limited to CPI increases, which have averaged 2.44. In this budget, we have the 2010 extension, which was limited to 2.7, 2011 extension, which was limited to 1.5. Other revenues, the corporate personal property replacement taxes, they're estimated to go back to the rates that we received in 2010, where 2011 there was a bit of an increase. Now they're expected to go back to the same level as 2010. The General State Aid Foundation level remained the same as the previous year at $6,119. However, the State Board of Ed, due to their financial issues in the state, will be prorating the General State Aid at 95%. That reduction will be taken out of the June 2012 payments. So the 2011 General State Aid was $3,220,768, compared to the FY 2012 will be $3,044,930, a General State Aid decrease of $175,838. And the state categorical grants, the State Board of Ed is, with the state being so far behind, they are recommending that we budget for 3 out of the 4 payments which is a conservative estimate. It could be that that we get 4. Last year we did get, in 2011, we did get 4 payments for categoricals, and we'll see how 2012 turns out. The same thing with state transportation reimbursement. We budgeted that at 75%. Interest earnings are really down, and they've been decreasing every year. As far as federal grants, the ARRA stimulus grants are coming to an end. It says on the slide that they are ending in August 2011. We just got some good news. They're extended to September. It's the same amount of money, just giving us an extra month to spend the ARRA grant funds. The federal grants for IDEA flow through, you will see in the budget, are a little bit higher because at the end of the year, some of the payments were lagging, which we'll be getting in. We getting in the early part of the fiscal year. You'll also note some additional revenues from new fees from transportation. On the next slide, this just kind of
before
shows,
you go on, Chris,
yeah.
just those are the budget assumptions that Chris has built into the budget going forward. It's important for us for the board, if you're comfortable with those assumptions, we will move those forward. But it is partly guessing on what's going to happen this coming year. This is our best guess of what's coming forward. I think Chris and I have talked. It's on the conservative side, but I think philosophically we want to be on the conservative side financially when we do these revenue assumptions, and hope that the assumptions are conservative and that we'll actually have greater increases. But philosophically, I think from the administration standpoint, we're going to build a budget on conservative numbers that we have and then add those later on. But again, it's important that the board understand that those are the assumptions we're walking in with and presenting to you this evening. If the board is not comfortable with those, then we can revise that. But those would be our recommendation for the assumptions this evening.
The next slide just shows our mix of revenues being 90% local, 3% federal, 7% state, which is very different from the state average. It shows how that we are very reliant on local revenues to fund the district. Can you show the revenue comparison? Just real fast. I'm not going to go through all the numbers, but it's a lot of what I've talked about already, property taxes being down. And one question that came up was about the E-rate funding there, which you can kind of see. The E-rate in FY10 was $185,000. The budget for FY11 was $100,000. We actually got in $41,275. And the tentative budget shows $45,000. Dave and I were looking into those numbers this afternoon. It's really a timing issue on the collection. The $185,000 was really a combination of 2 different years that were being reimbursed, and then in FY11 it was a partial year. So I think the $45,000 is a low figure. It should be, and we can fix it before the final budget. Because of that timing issue, it should go back up. We are estimating that each year they're about $125,000. So in FY10, due to the timing issue, we got more than what we expected. In FY11, we got less than what we expected. We should actually go back up in 2012. Now I'm going to go to the expenditure side of the equation. Back to the PowerPoint, please. On the expenditure side, the budget process for the entire budget process started a long time ago with the implementation of the EPERT process last fall and all the way into spring and summer, where budget reductions were recommended of $3,855,000 and budget additions of $857,000, and net savings of about $3 million in this budget were implemented into this budget, and that is a very large assumption in the budget. Also, in insurance premiums, we had no increase in the PPO. That's outstanding. That's based on our claims experience. The HMO increase of 10.7% and the dental at 5%. Those are all based on our claims increases. Transportation contracts, which we have two. The regular ed with first student is increasing from 2011 to 2012 at 1.5%. The other transportation contract we have is with Cottage Hill, and that is an increase of 2.5%. The bond principal and interest payments are based on our outstanding debt service schedules. The next slide, this is just an informational piece. It's driving the expenditures in the IMRF fund a little bit up. The IMRF fund, we have expenditures in there for Social Security, FICA, Medicare, and employer IMRF contributions. And these are our employer contribution rates for IMRF for the past 5 years, and you'll notice a significant increase. A lot of that increase is due to the reduced amount of investment earnings that the IMRF fund is earning, and also actuarial changes. A lot of it, actuarial studies are showing retirees living longer, and that's also changing, and the actuarial assumptions are increasing those lifespans, which is causing a bigger obligation and increase in employer rates. Now, we have two different groups of employees: non-certified staff, such as food service and secretaries, clerical aides are in the IMRF category, and then the certified staff are teachers, administrators, counselors, are TRS employees. The next chart shows just our distribution of expenditures: 66.92% of salaries, 11.83% benefits, so 78.75% of our operating expenditures are salaries and benefits, which are $77,748,441. This next slide is a summary of the tentative budget, which shows total revenues of $109,452,495 and total expenditures $109,138,664, which is a revenue surplus in excess of expenditures of $313,831. Just briefly go into the fund balance as a percentage of expenditures to show where we are, which this is good news that we are at 28.72% of operating expenditures, and at June 30th, 2012. That's based on the 2012 budgeted expenditures. And when you look back the 4 years, in 2009 we had 28.52%. So we are clinging to right at just over 28%, almost 29% in all 4 years, and so which is really hard to do in the current funding structure of Illinois schools to maintain the same level for 4 years. These show the individual operating fund balances, where you can see that the O&M is the best funded of the 4 individual operating funds. The school district can allocate general state aid and corporate personal property replacement taxes, and through the property tax levy process can allocate revenues to the different funds, and kind of control this balancing between the funds. The district can make transfers between education, operation maintenance, and the transportation fund. Those three main operating funds the board can transfer if they so choose with a budget with a board resolution. The total summary, like I said, operating revenues are $98,690,275 compared to operating expenditures of $98,736,906. It's very close, essentially a break-even year. Slight expenditures slightly more than revenues in the operating funds. Dave, can I see the overview real fast? This just shows, we might not be able to read it, but it shows what I've talked about, where you see the operating funds, the revenues are slightly more than expenditures, expenditures more than revenues, 46,000. And that shows our beginning balance with the budgeted surplus for the year in the 28.72%. Can we go back to the PowerPoint? The last slide is just our next steps. Like I said, the tentative budget will be on display for 30 days, and we will make changes before the budget hearing September 27th. And after that, we will file the budget with the state and other agencies. After that, we will be monitoring on a monthly basis, actual to budget. And then the 5-year projections, they use the budget numbers along with the audited amounts that the auditors have been in. They've finished their budget. Now they're in preparation of their reports, which will be coming at a future board meeting. So the PMA uses the budget and the audited figures and other information that we provide to do the 5-year projections. So that will be coming in the future. And after that, we begin the preparation of the tax levy in November. That concludes my tentative budget report.
Any questions for Mr. Welton? Mr. Collins?
If you were to trend revenues and expenses over the past few years, which is growing faster, revenues or expenses?
Expenditures. Revenues is very flat. Expenditures tend to increase faster. Now in this district, with all the budget cuts, the budget cuts have helped to keep the expenditures in check so that we could maintain where the district is currently at. But definitely the trend of increases on the expenditure side is greater than revenues.
Okay. And as I read through some of the detail, it wasn't in your presentation, but some of the detail in here, it seemed like there were no projected capital projects expenditures for this coming year that you budgeted?
None at this time, unless we decide to do something in the next 30 days before the final budget. There's a few little things that have popped up, little projects that Frank and his crew have been looking at, and so we're considering a few projects, but nothing major at all. There's a little roof issue at York that we are considering, and then maybe a fence at Bryan that we possibly could be doing at in the capital projects fund.
And this was not part of any of your presentations, just the last 2 years, gym lockers at the 3 middle schools have come up, and I think we've deferred them every single year. Is that part of?
I haven't heard of that at this point.
I'm sure Frank will let you know. Thank you.
Anyone else? Mr. McDonough?
I'm sorry, I really don't understand why property tax receipts would go down if we're levying to the max of the PTEL statute.
I tried to explain it, but it is hard. It's really a timing issue. The 2010, each extension will increase. This is just a timing issue where 2011 we had 52% in the fall and 50% in the spring, so it's really just a timing issue. It's not, we will get all money that we, each extension has increased, and we will get the normal 99% of the property taxes. It just, the FY11 numbers were higher than they normally would be due to a timing issue.
So Chris, if I can clarify it, just, so we collected more, and it sounds like it was almost 102% in property taxes. We then have to kind of pay that back this year and even it out to 100%, and that's why we have the shortfall for this year? Is that a simplified version of what we're doing?
Simplified version, yes. We do expect to receive about 100 or 99% of the property taxes in FY12.
But we kind of overpaid for that.
Last year we got
because of the
more.
timing of what happened. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Is a question an issue? This is cash basis.
Right.
So it's not what's levied when it's levied in the years that we think
Right.
about it as levied. If it comes in on June 30th, it goes to last year. If it comes in on July 1st, it goes
Right.
to this year. So is it really, you guys got a check on June 30th instead of July 1st? So you had, for cash basis accounting purposes, June, so fiscal 11 had more.
Right.
And it'll revert in fiscal 12 on a cash, your bank account still looks the same.
Right, right.
Right.
It's compounded by the fact that each levy goes into 2 different fiscal years,
Right,
which is very difficult.
right.
Any other questions? Mrs. Ebner?
Yeah, I had a question about our expenditures. A few meetings ago, we talked about position control, and for items like in the education fund, for salaries, purchase services, dues and fees and tuition, I just see from 2011 what we budgeted and what is actual. We were over budget in salaries, purchase services, dues, fees, and tuition, and I'm wondering, will position control alleviate being over budget in those line items, or just the salaries? I'm not sure what position control will, how that will help us.
Position control will help us accurately budget for salaries and benefits.
Okay.
And yes, then we should be right in line with budget. Better than we did in FY11, yes.
I wanted to point out just the purchase services I saw in 2 line items in the education fund and in transportation. We were over budget several $100,000, so I just wanted to take a closer look at that.
Okay, the transportation in FY11, from what I understand and talking to my staff, that, again, cash basis, they had caught up on some bills in FY11, so they actually paid 14 months of bills in FY11 on transportation, and that's why you see a decrease in FY12. That timing difference, so the 14 months to an FY12, we budgeted 12 months is really the difference there. And the education fund on purchase services, it's my understanding that that was a grant issue where we there was a change in a grant that caused some of the difference in purchase services.
Anyone else? Ms. Hirsch.
First of all, I want to say thank you, Chris. Having a 1-page on our expenditure summary broken out by fund, okay, and getting some level of detail is an improvement over where we've been. So the expenditure sheet, the revenue sheet, and the 1-pager, which is, it doesn't look like there's a lot of numbers. There are a lot of big numbers, but I think definitely the format from sitting on our passport, this is an improvement. So first of all, I want to thank you for that.
Thank you.
As well, I'm one of those that goes through the entire line item by line item by line item. Now, I'm not going to ask my line item by line item by line item questions, but one of the top level things that I did notice, and I think I mentioned it to you this afternoon, I don't know if you've had time to look at it, but there's a discrepancy or a difference in trends about employee benefits. And I don't know when I look at in the ed fund, the employee benefits, we are expecting to have a reduction of about $250,000, and yet our employee benefits in the O&M fund, we're expecting to have an increase in terms of our benefits. And I just was looking to see if we had some kind of idea why one group of employees, it's not really a group of employees, but it's certified and non-certified in the ed fund versus our O&M.
Right.
Our benefits packages generally should be the same. So have you had any time, I realize that you're 6 weeks into it and it's a $110 million budget. There's a lot to it, but that's one thing. If we can't answer tonight, that's fine, but I think that's one thing that I'd like to better understand, what our trending is on benefits and why that difference would be there.
I think each and every day we get closer to implementing position control, and I'm going to take a close look at that before our September 27th board meeting.
Okay, thank you. And just on a broader topic, Mr. Collins, you had brought up, capital fund projects and what we were doing. I mean, we need to move towards and present a budget to the state of Illinois. We have legal obligations to do that, but we also had some discussions in terms of the overall understanding of the revenues coming in, the expenditures going out. Position control is one of those things that we want to move towards, but I think there's also had been in the past some discussion about having a more complete long-term facilities plan, looking at our trending in terms of student enrollment and in the things that we're offering to students to have a little bit higher level picture. And this is all wonderful information, it's very helpful, but we need to look at what we're getting, the bang for the buck kind of thing, and have a discussion, I think, at the board table in terms of what investments we continue to make and how we're going to fund those investments and prioritize those. So I appreciate all the work that you've done, but I think we as a board also have some work that we can talk about doing in terms of having discussions around those priorities, how we set priorities, and how we fund the things that we choose to fund.
Yeah, Chris and I have talked a little bit about this, and I'll just use the one example. I think the facilities expenditure process, we need to develop a short-term and long-term plan on facilities and maintenance, and that's something that doesn't seem to exist right now or exists in pieces. And I think we need to present to the board what that looks like over the next at least 5-year period of, how are our facilities doing? What are major projects that we think are going to come forward? Do we know we have roofs that are getting to the end of their 20-year period, for example, and when is that going to occur? And then start talking about how can we address those needs. So that's something that Chris will be working with Frank, coming up with, what are those needs, and then presenting those back to the Board of Education so that you have a long range looking out forward on what those needs are going to be and how you're going to manage those in our budget, because that's the other piece. The capital outlays, as you just mentioned, are depleted. So now you're going to go into the general fund is one option in order to put money toward a capital maintenance projects account. How much do you put in there if that's a choice, and how is that managed over a long period of time? So those are all questions that I think as the administration we need to start presenting to you and talking about.
Mr. Collins.
To continue on that topic, because it's one that concerns me. Last spring, well before almost anybody in our administration's time, we had, and including the board, we had a 10-year facilities plan presented to us where it was basically $10 million over 10 years, so about $1 million a year. During my 2 years on the board, that's exactly about what we spent, is about $1 million a year. Now, my concern is that capital projects budget is down to $2 million. I want to avoid a crisis, and we're coming up on a crisis in a hurry, especially because the way you replenish that budget is a lengthy process. And we have 13 buildings, 13 great big buildings, which range from 10 years old to 100 years old. And those need maintenance, and we need to maintain our investment in those buildings. We can't have another situation where we let buildings deteriorate and it becomes a more expensive outlay for the taxpayer. So if we can move that up on the priority list, I would certainly appreciate it.
Mrs. Stufen. To that point, as I was listening to the board meetings throughout the year, I know that Lincoln was one of the schools that said we needed some work, and it wasn't mentioned here. So am I assuming correctly that we accounted for the immediate need of Lincoln in this year's budget, and that's why it's not mentioned in the projected budget for next year? And I'm sorry, I didn't think about it earlier to forewarn you.
You know, my take is the Lincoln building is a whole nother discussion, quite frankly, because I think some of the needs that I see at Lincoln and I think Chris sees at Lincoln, we need to discuss in addition to what I would call the routine maintenance and operation of the district and the capital programs. The $1 million a year will take care of things like boiler replacement, roof replacement, asphalt repair, sidewalk repair, those kind of normal things. But then when you have big ticket items, and I'm not an architect, so I haven't analyzed Lincoln, but I think what you're looking at may be some greater projects that, again, we're going to have to strategize looking down the road. And in the immediate future, I think Lincoln's fine. But in a relatively short time frame, we may be coming up on what are we going to do with Lincoln Elementary School and what are their needs there. And I can't answer that tonight. But I think those are two different paths you have to go down. The other thing that the board and we would have to consider, it may be $1 million a year every year, but then all of a sudden you have unforeseen emergencies that come up. How are you going to deal with that? Because we could be sitting here tomorrow, and I'm reporting back to the board that we had 3 boilers go out that all of a sudden have emergency repairs. Those, in my experience, really hit your maintenance and operation budget. So you need to be some proactive planning on how you're reserving some funding for that, and what are those likelihoods going to happen. And so that's another conversation with Frank and Chris and all of us to sit down and talk about that.
Mr. Collins.
In that facilities plan, 10-year facilities plan that was presented last spring, I took note that about $4 million of that $10 million was targeted toward Lincoln School. That was the #1 biggest use of cash out of that fund. And it just made sense to step back and say, if we're going to maintain this building for $4 million over the next 10 years, what does it cost to build a new one? So that's something, again, I'd like to pursue that discussion as well. And we have time to do it, but again, I don't want it to be a crisis. And the #2 building for capital projects was Churchville Middle School. It had multiple plumbing issues and heating and ventilating issues that just things that are natural wear and tear due to its age.
I had one question for you, Chris. On your tentative budget summary page, first of all, thank you for bringing us a balanced budget. I mean, it would be really awful to think we went through that whole EPIRT process and didn't come up with a balanced budget. But as I look at this summary page, we still are in the red a little bit on our operating funds. And what really balances the budget is this debt service money that's coming in. And why is it more than we are going to spend? I didn't think that the county gave us any more money for debt service than we actually needed.
The debt service, the principal and interest on our debt service is increasing. And the levy is for the next year. So due to that, the timing of that, you're levying for future years where debt expenditures are higher and going up, there's going to be a surplus because the revenues you're receiving are to pay future payments that are increasing.
So it's not really a surplus, we're just getting it early?
Yeah.
And we best not spend it?
We will not spend it.
Okay. So while it shows a little surplus of, what, $313,000, it's really not. That money is earmarked.
It is earmarked. The debt service fund is earmarked to pay the principal and interest, yes.
Mr. Collins.
On that topic, I would encourage you to work with whoever you work with to take a look in this era of unprecedentedly low interest rates. I'd encourage you to keep an eye toward defeasing our current debt, or I should say opportunities to defease our current debt and reissue our debt at a lower interest rate, and akin to refinancing your house.
I met with our bond debt person on Friday from William Blair, Elizabeth Hennessy. It was very informative presentation, and if we have a finance committee, I think it would be valuable for the finance committee to see exactly where we are with each bond issue. Some of the bonds that we have outstanding unfortunately have some non-callable bonds for a period of time, and that presents some problems, but there's and like you said, the interest rates are extremely low, and we'd love to take advantage of that, but we're limited in because of some of the way the bonds were structured and the not being callable. But we do have some options in that regard that I think we need to have a presentation about that.
Mr. McDonough.
The debt that we do have is the bonds that were issued for the 2006 referendum proceeds?
Well, there's several different issues. It's I think this she did a PowerPoint presentation for me, or a handout that was 15 to 20 pages of information regarding all of our different debt and what we can do. So that's part of it, the 2006. But there are other issues. We've done a refunding in 2007. There were several issues that we have outstanding.
Topic for another meeting. Mr. Bloom.
Yeah, could you share that? I used to do those analyses. I used to do the
Be happy to.
stuff, and I'm thinking on guy too. I would love to see that. See what they're proposing.
She just emailed it to me yesterday, so I have it in my email. I could just forward.
That'd be great.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Hirsch.
I just want to, there's nothing in here that is significantly off. We made our budget cuts earlier this year because we kind of understood what the overall financial picture was going to be. But I just want to confirm, Chris, that we don't see anything significant. I mean, we're being conservative in terms of our state payments. We're being conservative in terms of what our tax collections are going to be and those kind of things, and hopefully conservative in our expenditures as well. But there's no significant large event that we can anticipate at this point that is going to dramatically change our financial situation. We're feeling we're on a roll in terms of maintaining our fund balances, but there's no large source of revenue. Their financial situation has pretty much been consistent and stated, and we're moving along the same path. Is that a fair assessment? The state of Illinois, their financial situation, we don't see any significant change in terms of revenue sources and those types of things.
Not on the revenue side.
Right.
On the expenditure side, like I said, salaries is the biggest thing. So contracts are very important in that regard. So that's one thing that will impact the FY12 budget.
Thank you again. We appreciate your getting this together so quickly upon arriving at our doorstep. Next item on the agenda is the tax abatement discussion. Mr. Purnell.
Yeah, I thought I would put this on the agenda tonight just to get a reading from the Board of Education. This is kind of a philosophical discussion. I have been approached by a local municipality asking whether the board has in the past or would consider in the future tax abatement for property assessment. This is new territory for me. I have never had anyone approach a school board to ask about tax abatements. So let me outline just what a tax abatement would be about and where the board wants to go with tax abatements, first from a philosophical standpoint, and then based on that discussion, where we want to go in the future with this. Usually tax abatements are granted by cities and other local entities when they are trying to attract a business to a locality. And usually corporations or businesses will consider the relocation or the location of property to develop, but want a tax abatement in order to do that. The tax abatement usually is based on the existing property, and what they request is that for a period of time, there would be a decrease in their liability to property tax over a period of time. Normally 10 to 15 years, sometimes corporations ask for 20-year abatements. And what that means is, and I'll just use this as an example, you would grant a tax abatement to say, we are only going to tax the property at a rate of 20% rather than a whole 100% tax that you would usually get on that property. Usually the attraction is that the company wants some kind of break in redeveloping. They feel the property tax is a way to get that break for their investment in the redevelopment. The advantage to the local is they do get new businesses in the area, but again, you're banking on the future with the tax assessment. You're not going to receive the revenue from the tax property if it goes up and how significantly it goes up. And you're not going to capture all of that for a period of time. And again, that's negotiable. How long the tax abatement runs, what is the percentage on the tax abatement. So there's all kinds of issues that would have to be worked out if you consider a tax abatement kind of philosophy for a local district. Again, this is the first time in my career that I've had anybody approach a local school board on a tax abatement issue. So I don't believe it's ever come up in Elmhurst before, and people I've talked to, doesn't seem like it's come up before. And so I just thought I'd open it up for discussion this evening to get a reading on the board of whether or not you want to even entertain the possibility of tax abatements. And if so, then we can do more administrative work on it and report back to the board at a future date.
What do we think, board? Mr. McDonough.
I have a couple questions. This is basically an investment in EAV growth or in property tax value for property taxes. What would be the participation of the other taxing districts in this endeavor?
You know, I would assume that you would have to come together, and I'm sure the company would say, I want an 80% tax abatement over the next 10 years for all property taxes that I'm being charged to, wherever it comes from. Mm-hmm. Now, we're the big player in that. 75% comes to the school district. So obviously, a corporation would be very interested in what the local district would be willing to give them. But I would assume, and I don't know this, but I would assume they would ask for an 80%, if that's the number, 80% tax payment across the board for all who are collecting property tax assessment.
Another question I have is whether the abatement, and it's typically a rate reduction, phrases a rate reduction?
Usually, yes. Okay. In my experience, and again, I've got limited experience with this, but I understand it's usually a percentage rate reduction.
Is there a way, well, I guess, is it recoverable or replaceable under the tax cap law, or is it just simply lost revenue, a straight investment in developing EAV?
I would assume it's a straight investment. Okay. And again, there's a lot of nuances to this. For example, if you entered into the agreement, I think one of the things you would want to know is how long is the company, is there a commitment by the company to stay a number of years, and what does that commitment look like? And are they liable for the lost property tax if they move out and the company abandons that site? What's the consequence of that? I mean, so there's a lot of questions to be answered if you start to go down that road. And I have not, nor has my administrative team, done a lot of research on this because I want to just get a feel from the board on where you were on this. But I would assume that would be the case, John.
My feeling is let's look at anything and everything. I think we owe it to the community to do that. Certainly what Chris just presented was a balanced budget, and obviously whatever reduction in revenue there is, you would have to, adjust that if it happens in a, year you've already budgeted for. But our goal would be EAV growth in this. Are there other goals that we would accomplish other than simply building property tax base?
Not off the top of my head.
Okay.
I think that's what basically this comes down to. Now, obviously, from the city government issue, there are probably other issues of attracting corporations increasing business, all of those issues. From a school district standpoint, you could say, and this might be a reach, but you could say if a corporation has a lot of new jobs that are being relocated because of this redevelopment, are we going to get more students, and property assessment overall will go up because now this corporation is going to draw other families. So there is that factor. Again, I think it depends on what kind of company, how many employees are they going to, employ in the local economy, what are they paying, what kind of jobs are they creating.
Mr. Bloom, did you have your hand up first? Go ahead, Mr. Collins.
I mean, it's kind of a broad statement. I prefer to attract residents and businesses to this community by having great schools. Now, with that said, I think the answer to that question is, in all cases, it depends. I can think of scenarios where, the answer is absolutely not, but I can also think of scenarios that somewhere to come to us and say, look, we're asking you to abate taxes on one property. If you don't do that, we're going to declare a much broader tract of the city a TIF. And we could go without revenue increases for 23 years in a TIF district at a much broader basis. And that, over time, if you take the net present value, might be lower revenues than abating property taxes for 10 years, or whatever the time frame may be, 5 years, whatever, on one parcel of land. So, I think this body's got to just consider it on a case-by-case basis.
Ms. Hirsch.
I wholeheartedly agree with you, Mr. Collins, that we want to attract people to our community because we have excellent schools and an excellent educational experience for our students. In general, my personal belief is that I do believe in investment in our community, and I think in some cases, I'll give you an example of a TIF that we agreed to participate in Bensonville. At the beginning, I think the board had just switched over, and it was a no-brainer. It was a piece of property that was, for the most part, unusable, had very low. We weren't collecting taxes on it anyway. We agreed to the TIF. It was something that we're not going to get any income for that for 23 years. But at the end of those 23 years, we're hoping that there's going to be some increased EAV. I do agree with you, it's a case-by-case basis. However, the thing that I am concerned with is that as a Board of Education, we are not entering into real estate investment deals where we are trying to assess an individual parcel and we are trying to evaluate an individual corporation or somebody approaching us with an opportunity. I would like to see our administrative time spent on improving the educational experience and student growth, rather than spending a large amount of time on evaluating a particular individual parcel investment opportunity. So, while I believe in investing in your community and development, I'm not sure that I would welcome us spending a lot of time on evaluating an individual proposition. I would leave that to the city governments which are in place to build the tax base and to handle those types of things.
Mr. Bloom.
I think I agree with what Maria's saying, and let me clarify, I guess, the way I understand it too. And that I think we should be pro-growth for the community. It comes out of the same pocket, whether I'm writing a tax check to the property tax side or I'm paying more sales tax or whatever I'm doing. We all live in Elmhurst. We've got to fund our city government, our police, our fire, our schools out of the same pocket. So we would like a seat at that table. But to your point, I think that if this is a transaction which benefits the city from a different kind of revenue source that it increases, that the city then has an obligation to come to us to explain to us why we should consider forgoing certain revenue sources for the greater good of the city. And I think that we want to participate in that kind of a discussion, and we want a seat at that table. But we're not going to be the ones that are driving that. Somebody else has to prove to us that as a whole, Elmhurst is better off because of this. And, we're more than willing to have a discussion about taking one for the team on our side. But we have to fund our budget. And so it's, to Jim's point, it's a case-by-case basis. I don't think we take anything off the table. I think we'd like to have a discussion relationship with the city that would allow these discussions to go forward, but they need to take the lead to the extent that it's in their it's more beneficial to their revenue streams than it is to ours.
Mrs. Ebner.
Yeah, I agree with Jim and Maria. You know, we're in the business of improving schools and student achievement, but I don't want to say, no, we're not interested in tax abatements, won't even look at it. I think that's a little closed-minded. We should keep an open mind and look at the details, case-by-case basis. So I guess for me, it does depend.
Mrs. Steuven.
I had a prepared statement, but basically what I'm going to say is, for us as a school district, of course we're about growth, but we are the stewards of the children of, who are in the school today and the future. And we're about increasing student achievement and performance for the district. We just heard from YSET. We heard that, there's a lot of families that are taking a hit with the increased fees. So we, as good stewards of the tax dollars for the students and what we need to achieve, we have to be careful of, as Chris indicated, the expenses going up, revenue staying flat. And we need to be creative on revenue sources. So I think that we'll be open to looking at, TIFs or tax abatements or whatever is right, but we have to look at it to ensure that we are good stewards of what we're supposed to be doing, and that is increasing the educational experience for the students in District 205.
I have a question. Does tax abatement work similar to a TIF in that we get to levy whatever we need, whatever, the CPI, not what we need, but the CPI or 5%, whichever is less, regardless of where it's coming from? Or do we do that levy and then have to abate these dollars to this municipality, company, whoever we're dealing with? Do we know? I couldn't.
I do.
Because that to me is huge. I mean, if it's just like another little TIF, then we can have a TIF discussion. If it's a private TIF, then we can go there, which, frankly, I don't want to. But to me, we need to know that before we can even go any further.
Well, I think what I'm hearing is the board wants us to investigate this a little further. So, and we will try to answer those questions, look at specifics, and then come back to the board with further discussion. Again, I didn't want to go down this road just because of the time involved in this, but it sounds like there's enough interest. We can start exploring that, see where it goes, and then report back to the Board of Education. Thank you.
It would be my recommendation that you don't spend a lot of time on it. I agree with Ms. Hirsch and everything that has been said about what we're here to do, and that's not to provide for economic growth. I mean, and I agree there's trade-offs and you have to look at all sides, but that's not our primary purpose here. And I just think if you can get some answers to a couple of questions as to how it works on this individual case, we can evaluate that, but we don't want to be, we got other things to do. Mr. McDonough.
I just want to say, I view it as an investment decision, but investment involves risk. And one of our jobs is to remove the risk for the educational system here in District 205. And so it has to be pretty darn good for us to take on additional risk, is my opinion.
That moves us to the next item on our agenda, which is simply, I believe, an announcement that we will have a TIF discussion when we can get it together at our next meeting.
Yeah, we would really like to reserve September 13th. I know the board is anxious to have this discussion on TIF. Chris has been trying to do that, but he's also been dealing with budget, so Chris is going to have some time now, a little time, to try to pull things together for the discussion on the 13th. So tentatively, we'll put that aside for that discussion, but I know the board was anxious to get this scheduled.
Ms. Hirsch.
I will add, for my fellow board members, I started doing a little bit of research. I had read the document that had been provided from the city in terms of their looking forward into potential new investments in TIF areas. But in doing some of my research, I came across the city's website, which does have the annual TIF report, which gives a fairly decent detailed overview of the TIFs that are already in existence and where they are and what the revenue stream was and those kind of investments that they've been making. So just for board members, reference, you can go out to the city's website and look up the TIF information and get the last couple of years of the annual report. We do have an annual meeting, I think it happens in December, between all of the taxing bodies that are affected by all of the TIFs. And they provide a fairly comprehensive, I haven't sat into the meetings, I'm not sure who on the board did sit on those meetings in December, but good background information to get yourself up to speed.
Mr. Collin.
I'm the member of the board that's been sitting in those meetings for the last two years. So first, let me ask, is this going to be kind of a TIF primer, how they work, the mechanics of them, which I think is kind of essential to know before you can have any kind of a meaningful TIF discussion. I think there's a lot of misperceptions about TIFs out there, and I think it would be good for the board. Now, with that said, I'm also happy to talk to any board member who, thinks there's any use in talking to me about how TIFs work.
I think it's going to be a TIF primer as well as an understanding of what has gone on in the past with intergovernmental agreements and previous TIFs and contracts, agreements that we have with the city of Elmhurst regarding being made whole after having extended the TIF in 2004. Mr. McDonough.
I just, some questions. I don't want to advance the discussion when we're not ready to have it, but I read the document, the 100-page document, and I have more questions after reading it than I do before. And I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity to follow up with the city some of these questions before we have our session. One of the things that I noticed is it doesn't really, well, first thing it doesn't say is what's the timing. How much time is the city allowing before they consider this thing? There were some reports in the news media that indicated that this thing was going to move rather quickly once it did. I'd like to get an understanding from the city what their time frame would be. Understanding that, there may or may not be a role for the district. I would hope that just sense of community would, allow us to speak our minds on this, regardless of our legal involvement. Second thing that I'd like to hear from the city would be the planning component. What we saw in that TIF report was a financial analysis, but not something that tells us what it is that they want to build in each of the 5 districts that they've proposed. What the goal is. Is it, creating commercial traffic, which may or may not be beneficial to us as much as building EAV. In some cases, it's raised population. So I think I'd like to see what the city's development goals are and kind of have that added on. Also like to know where these 5 areas came from. Why were they determined? If you look at the 5 areas, it looks like, except for Spring Road, it includes all the commercial areas of the city. And there are boundaries drawn on them. I'm just wondering why were specific boundaries drawn in certain ways. There are bulges in and bulges out, and how did they come up with these areas? And then just simply, we pride ourselves on being a district of data. I'd like to know what the data is. There's a comparison of EAV growth to EAV growth citywide, and this is principally a residential community, and as a result it seemed to be comparing commercial industrial EAV to what is principally large residential EAV. And I'd like to see comparisons of apples to apples, which would be commercial industrial to commercial industrial. I'd like to also, as you're looking in, see what the impact would be both in terms of the reallocation of property tax burden to the taxpayers and how that would shift depending on the size of the TIF. And some are bigger and some are smaller in the report. But I'd also look to see, what the cost to us would be, actual, not replaceable EAV growth. In other words, what new growth would we be foregoing. I know you can't look in a crystal ball, but some sort of projection using historical data. I just want to make sure that we go into this discussion with as much data as we possibly could get.
We may not have the answers to all those questions on next meeting, but thanks for the heads up, Ms. Hurst.
I kind of see this as there's three things that need to take place. One is we need the primer on TIFs to make sure that everybody is very comfortable and understands the financial implications and the pros and cons of TIFs. The second thing, and Chris, I'm adding to your plate here, but I don't know, along with the discussion about the long-term facilities plan, I know that we have a number of TIFs and we have a number of commitments that we've already made. And I don't know that I have ever seen in my tenure on the board any kind of document that says we expect properties to be released, the TIF to expire, okay, so TIF 1, TIF 2, and TIF 3, when those TIFs are scheduled to expire. So if for instance, and it goes along with our bonds and what our expected payments are, I know we have 5-year debt certificates, we have 20-year debt certificates, and I'm not looking for a ton of detail, but if we know what years our current commitments are and what we anticipate those financial releases to be, and it might be a lot of this, but I think that we should start with understanding what commitments the Board of Education is already under. Not that we agreed to the TIFs, but we live within those constraints when the city imposes TIFs. So for the 3 TIFs that we have, we should understand, how many properties are going to be released when and what we would anticipate those financial impacts to our budget to be in out years. Is that a fair? And then we can go into a discussion of, future TIFs. So there's kind of, learning about it, learning what our current commitments are and our current restrictions are, and then moving forward into what the new opportunities might be for city development.
Okay, let's move along. Next item on our agenda is the approval of board minutes of July 19th and August 4th. Are there any additions or corrections to these minutes? Mr. McDonough.
Are these the revised minutes?
These are revised minutes.
Revised draft
These are
minutes.
minutes that have already received individual board
No,
members'
nothing.
Comments. And those corrections have been made. Seeing none other, those minutes will stand approved as presented on board docs tonight. Okay. The next item on the agenda is the consent agenda, superintendent's consent agenda. Tonight's consent agenda contains the personnel report, financial reports, the Freedom of Information Act requests, the approval of a donation to Emerson School, the posting of our tentative budget, which we need to do by law. It includes a number of second readings to minor changes in policies, the first readings of which we've already approved. It includes the bid for some paper, and the approval of a foreign exchange student, and the approval of the superintendent's 100-day transition plan. Does anyone wish to remove one of these items for discussion? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda as just outlined. Mr. McDonough.
I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about item N.
We will remove the superintendent's 100-day transition plan, talk about that separately. Without that, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda? Ms. Hirsch?
I move that we approve the consent agenda as presented minus item N.
Is there a second? Seconded by Mr. Collins to approve the consent agenda without item N. Mrs. Walsh, could you call the roll, please?
Ms. Hirsch?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. McDonough?
Yes.
Mrs. Ebner?
Yes.
Mr. Bloom?
Yes.
Mrs. Droney?
Yes.
Mrs. Stufen?
Yes. 7 ayes, no nays. That motion carries. Could I have a motion to approve the superintendent's 100-day transition plan, please?
I move approval of the superintendent's 100-day transition plan.
Is there a second? Moved by Mr. McDonough, seconded by Mrs. Ebner to approve the 100-day transition plan as presented by the superintendent. Is there any discussion, Mr. McDonough?
Yes, I just was wondering, Dave, if you could take a few minutes. We've talked a little bit about this in our orientation sessions about, how this is going to develop, and I just thought maybe you could say a few words since we have people on tape and people in the audience here.
Yeah, I think when before I came, the board was very interested in what a transition plan would look like, and wanted the Board of Education to have a transition plan in their hands before I arrived. So I actually sent this before July 1st, I think it was in May, to all the board members and asked for input and suggestions. From that, I developed this 100-day transition plan that you have before you this evening. The transition plan really tries to stress a couple of things. Number one, it emphasizes the amount of time that I'm going to spend listening and engaging in the community and all the stakeholders in Elmhurst related to the discussion about our school district. And I think that's important for the superintendent to do, especially the new superintendent who's coming on board. I need to gather as many information and facts as I possibly can and opinions about the strengths and weaknesses of Elmhurst and what things we need to improve, what things we're doing a great job on. And I need to do that proactively. I can't depend on people walking in my office and telling me what that is. So I think if you look at the 100-day plan, I'm trying to be out in the community as much as possible, offering myself to groups, getting on agendas for a variety of organizations, and having that discussion among all of those stakeholders about it. Whether or not they're parents or not, I want to engage the whole community in that. The second thing is to establish regular communication lines across the district. Regular things that I'm going to do on a regular basis to continue that dialogue from now as long as I'm superintendent. Because again, what I want to emphasize is the opening up of communication lines across the district so that I, as superintendent, my administrative team, is always trying to listen to the opinions and the observations of all of the stakeholders in the district. Again, I can't do that from sitting in my office. I have to be proactive and do that. So things like having a monthly community coffee, things like redeveloping the district leadership team with the Teachers Association to get that input from all of those stakeholders. And I've met with a variety of officials already. I've met, for example, with the mayor's office and his team, those kinds of teams. But again, establishing regular communication lines is part of the theme of this 100-day plan. And then ultimately what I want to do is, as I gather this information and there are themes emerging about what we do well, what we need to improve, and how we can do a better job at some areas, I'll use that as background as the Board of Education and the administrative team starts sitting down and setting a new strategic plan, setting new goals, and where we need to improve as a district. And part of that, again, is using data, but also using this kind of I call it effective data, people who come to us, and there's themes that come out that I think that are valid that you start talking about. I think, obviously if board members are talking to community members, you have those themes too. And so it's a matter of matching up those themes and looking for a path and direction. So I think, I'm on my way in this 100-day plan. Quite frankly, I've already done a lot of the things that are on this plan, but I still need to do more. And one of the things that did dawn on me is how early we're starting school here. So starting the school district was one of the things that wasn't in my 100-day plan. It's kind of a big miss. So I apologize. But yeah. So after this week, I'll be concentrating back on continuing with the 100-day plan. So I don't know if there's any questions from board members that would be willing to.
Mrs. Stufen.
I don't have any questions, and what I wanted to do, though, is, Dave, thank you for sharing that 100-day plan well in advance of July 1st and presenting it or sharing it with the board so that we could provide input. What I really liked about it is that the key intent was not just to perform activities, but to be purposeful in what you did. And what you were going to do is, bring that information to how you manage the district, bringing it with the entire District 205 employees as well as the Board of Education for us to, meet our objectives of increasing student performance, improving, employees wanting to work here and wanting to develop themselves and stay here. So I really do appreciate that you gave it to us in advance and that we've talked about it, since you've been here and even throughout our retreat and strategic planning meetings.
Ms. Hirsch.
What we owe you next, Mr. Pernod, is a fair discussion and a good discussion around setting your goals for the year. Our superintendent we employ on a multi-year contract, and the contract is on the website. You can see it, and really the only few goals that are honestly our past board had set for Dave as he came onto the district were very sketchy, because the intention was that the new board would sit down with Dave. We would look at, take an assessment of where we are as a district and set some goals. So it's our responsibility as well to get that on an agenda and start talking about what goals we want to set for Dave and for the entire team for the year beyond the 100-day plan. So we will owe you that as well.
Mr. Collins.
I would just like to suggest that we do that after Mr. Pernod has been able to fully accomplish his 100-day plan.
Do you have any interest in having this 100-day plan on the website, perhaps on your page? It's on board docs, but
it's on board docs.
Does
We can move
everybody
it to
go
the
board
regular
docs?
webpage.
Okay.
I should say this, I also shared it with the cabinet and my immediate team at the same time I shared it with the board. So I asked for, and they had great suggestions too, so all of that's been incorporated in this document.
The motion on the floor is to approve the superintendent's 100-day plan. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. That motion carries. Next item on our agenda is the approval of revised policy 7100. Is there a motion, please? Mrs. Ebner.
I move to approve policy 7:100, health, eye, and dental examinations.
It's been moved by Mrs. Ebner, seconded by Mr. McDonough to approve the changes to policy 7100, which deals with health, eye, and dental examinations. Mr. Pernod, would you like to give us a little background?
Yes, this came to our attention as we started to move forward on the start of school. And one of the things that had happened through the IPER process was the scaling back of health professionals in the school district. And so many of our health aides do not start until after the school year starts or simultaneously. When we ran across this, we also discovered that by policy, our policy states that we will exclude all students who do not meet the state requirements by the first day of school. The problem became we don't have anybody to evaluate those records before the start of school. Now, this was an Elmhurst policy, not a state policy. The state guidelines are October 15th is the deadline to exclude students. So this evening, based on the urgency of this, I'm asking the board to enact their emergency protocols for approving this change in policy, and we would abandon the first day of school exclusion for students, and we would go to the state date, which is October 15th. That will give us enough time to evaluate all of those medical records on all the students in the transition from 5th to 6th, 8th to 9th grade, and then have a fair date for parents as the exclusion date for October 15th. So that's what I'm requesting from the Board of Education this evening.
Our own board policy on policy development 2240 makes provision for such an emergency adoption where we don't have to do first reading and a second reading, providing that we get the unanimous approval of all board members who are present. Are there any other questions about this policy?
Let me just add that the only change in this policy are the dates to October 15th. The policy itself stays exactly the same.
Motion on the floor is to approve the changes to policy 7100 on health, eye, and dental examinations. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. I believe that was unanimous. We can now start school. That's good.
We'll have some.
That concludes our agenda. We have upcoming meetings. Tuesday, September 13th will be our workshop meeting at 7:30 here. And Tuesday, September 27th, we will have both budget hearing, I believe, as well as a regular Board of Education business meeting. Board communications. Anyone wishing to share anything with the board? Ms. Hirsch.
Thank you. I and several district administrators attended an event where our legal counsel, Tracy Rebeletti, provided information about recent education reforms in Illinois. This session was very informative. It highlighted some of the significant changes we will need to address as a district in the near future. PERA, or the Performance Evaluation Reform Act, which was signed into law in January of 2010, combined with the more recent Senate Bill 7 and House Bill 1197, make important changes relating to teacher hiring, teacher and principal evaluations, teacher tenure, teacher professional development and remediation plans, tenured teacher dismissal hearings, reduction in force, labor issues, and school board member training. A lot of topics that are covered here. Some of these changes are phased in over years. Some of them have gone into effect immediately. These changes will clearly have an impact on some of our policies and practices in the district, and it appears there's a significant amount of work which will be required by our administration to implement these changes. Some further education on the changes and how they'll affect our district might be helpful for board members and administrators alike. If there's a consensus of board members, I would like to see us work some of these discussions into our future board agendas, either as a workshop or a study session. Topic. Franzik offered up this printed material, which gives a great overview of the timeframes of all of the changes that impact us. And we're trying to get a PDF copy of this so we can provide it to all board members, but a number of our administrators were there as well. But there are a date as early as December 1st for forming some committee related to some of these things. So there are some things that are imminent that our administration is going to have to deal with. And I just wanted to bring it to the board's attention. It's going to affect our administrators' workload, and there are significant training requirements for our administrators as well. I think there's one training session that could be 3 to 5 days in length. And I think the State Board of Ed is scrambling to try to put some things in place to meet these requirements. But these are a lot of change is going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years related to this legislation. So I wanted to highlight it for fellow board members, and I'm trying to get a copy of this to you so you can get it from our attorneys, what their take is on it, and a summary of the dates and changes.
Thank you for that information. Any other board communications? Seeing none, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
A second.
Moved and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. Thank you. We are adjourned. We appreciate your being here with us and watching. Thanks.